While I was in the ICU, my son and daughter-in-law went to Dubai. But what I discovered later made me realize that some betrayals hurt more than any illness. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if, for a second, this sounds familiar to you, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me to keep unburdening myself. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I'm 72 years old. This October morning, as the cold New York air seeped through the cracks of my small apartment in Queens, I woke up with that strange pain in my chest that I had been ignoring for weeks, a dull ache that spread down my left arm like an electric current, accompanied by a feeling of suffocation that made me break out in a cold sweat. The walls of my bedroom, painted that faded yellow I chose 20 years ago thinking it would bring me joy, now only reflected the loneliness that had become my most faithful companion. On the nightstand, the photo of my son Daniel with his wife Megan and my grandson Noah looked at me from a golden frame I had polished with so much care that I could see the reflection of my wrinkled face in the glass. At 6 a.m, when the pain became unbearable, I dialed Daniel's number with trembling fingers. 1, 2, 3 calls went straight to voicemail. His phone was off or in airplane mode. Finally, Megan answered with that groggy voice of someone who has been reluctantly awakened. "Eleanor? What is it now?" She sighed with that tone of weariness she had perfected over the years. "Megan, honey, I feel really bad. My chest hurts and I can't breathe properly. I think I need to go to the hospital." There was a pause. I heard the rustle of sheets, Daniel's voice in the background asking what was wrong. "Seriously, Eleanor?" Megan sighed dramatically. "Today of all days, when we have our flight to Dubai. We've been planning this trip for months. Can't you wait until we get back? Megan, please, this isn't one of my little aches and pains. I really feel—" "Tell her if it's serious, the hospital will call us." I heard Daniel's voice from the background, clear as a slap in the face. "We've already paid for the flights and the hotel. We can't cancel over another one of her scares." The line went dead. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone as if it were a foreign object. The room spun slightly, and I had to grip the mattress. In that moment, the physical pain became secondary to the pang I felt in my soul. My own words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. Megan, honey. I had called her honey and daughter for 12 years, ever since she married Daniel, and she had just treated me like a hysterical old woman interrupting an important vacation. With shaky hands, I called 911. The operator, a young woman with a professional but warm voice, calmed me down while we waited for the ambulance. "Ma'am, you did the right thing by calling. The symptoms you're describing require immediate attention." As I gathered the essentials in a small bag, my phone charger, my wallet, my medications, my eyes fell on the bookshelf where I kept the letters Noah had written to me when he was little. "Nana Eleanor, I love you so much and I hope to see you soon," said one in the clumsy handwriting of a red crayon. I hadn't seen him in over 6 months. Megan always had an excuse. He had too much homework. They had plans with other friends. It was better if he didn't come over, so he doesn't get used to depending so much on his grandparents. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes that felt like hours. The paramedics, an older man with a gray mustache and a young woman with a blonde ponytail, asked me questions while they connected me to a portable monitor. The irregular beep of my heart filled the small space of the ambulance like a sad song. "Is there anyone we can notify, ma'am?" the paramedic asked as she checked my blood pressure. "My son, but he's traveling," I murmured, feeling the weight of shame. At Mount Sinai Hospital, Dr. Evans, a man in his 40s with the serenity of someone who has seen too much suffering, explained in simple terms that I had suffered a mild heart attack but needed to be under observation in the ICU. "Mrs. Hayes, you got here in time, but your heart needs rest. We're going to monitor you continuously for the next 48 hours. From the ICU bed, hooked up to wires that made me feel like a science experiment, I called Daniel again. This time, he answered directly. I could hear the airport noise in the background, gate announcements, the roll of suitcases on the polished floor. "Mom, what's wrong? Megan told me you were being dramatic again." "Daniel," my voice came out broken. "I'm in the ICU at Mount Sinai. I had a heart attack." There was a silence. Then I heard his voice move away from the phone, speaking to Megan. "She says she had a heart attack. Her response came through as clear as water. "Oh, for God's sake. It's always something right when we're about to leave. Tell her to talk to the doctors. We're not doctors." "Mom," Daniel came back. "Look, we're already boarding. If it's serious, have the hospital call us. We can't do anything from here." "Son, I just wanted you to know." "Mom, I have to go. We'll see you when we get back next week." The line went dead again. This time, I didn't cry. At 72, tears become a luxury you can't afford to waste on those who don't deserve them. Grace, a nurse around my age with gentle hands and compassionate eyes, came over to adjust my pillow. "Will your family be coming to visit?" she asked delicately. "They're traveling," I replied, trying to make it sound normal, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for your only son to go to Dubai while you're hooked up to a heart monitor. Grace nodded without asking questions. She had seen too many beds empty of visitors to be surprised. That night, as the monitor marked every beat of my wounded heart, I looked out the window at the lights of New York. Somewhere in that city that had been my home for 50 years, there were apartments full of families eating dinner together, children doing homework while their grandparents helped them, sons calling their mothers to ask how they were. And I was here, in this white bed, discovering that the love I had given my whole life had been a loan they never intended to repay. The monitor kept beeping in the darkness, each sound marking not only the beats of my heart, but the rhythm of a life that was about to change forever. As the morphine lulled me to sleep in that hospital bed, my mind drifted backward, like a scratched record stuck on the same song. But this time, every memory was tinged with a new bitterness, like when you discover the coffee you thought was sweet had salt in it from the start. I remembered that April morning in 1978, when Daniel was just 3, and I worked cleaning offices in Midtown Manhattan. I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, leave the boy sleeping at my neighbor Esperanza's place, and take the first subway to Park Avenue. My hands, still young but already calloused by industrial detergent, scrubbed marble floors while I imagined that one day my son would walk on these same floors as a lawyer or a doctor, not as the invisible woman who cleaned them. I would come home at 2 in the afternoon, pick up Daniel from Esperanza's, make him lunch, and then sit down with my Singer sewing machine, that black relic with gold pedals I had inherited from my mother, to do alterations that earned me a few dollars apiece. Hems, zippers, buttons. I worked until my eyes closed, always with Daniel playing at my feet with his little plastic cars. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a really big house," he would tell me with the solemnity children have when they make promises they believe are eternal. "And I'm going to live in it with you forever," I'd reply, kissing the top of his head that smelled of baby shampoo. I never went out. Not to the movies, not for a beer with friends, not even for walks in Central Park on Sundays. All my money, every dime I earned with chapped hands and an aching back, was for Daniel. Books, clothes, school trips, expensive SAT prep courses, because a good college is the future, Mom. I would nod and pay, even if it meant my dinner for months was just toast with butter and sugar. When Daniel turned 18 and got into NYU to study business, I took out a second mortgage on my small apartment to pay for his tuition. "It's an investment, Mom," he'd say when I handed him the envelope with the monthly payment. "When I finish and get a good job, I'll pay you back for everything, with interest." For 5 years, I kept up with that mortgage by working as a housekeeper in private homes. I especially remember the home of Mrs. Blanchard, on the Upper East Side, where I cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday. She was an elegant woman, a diplomat's widow, who had a habit of leaving books open in strategic places to show off her culture. She treated me with a cold politeness, as if I were a necessary but invisible appliance. "Eleanor," she would say without looking up from her magazine, "you don't need to clean the library today. My granddaughter is coming over with her friends from college, and I don't want them to feel uncomfortable." I would nod and go scrub bathrooms for 3 extra hours without extra pay, because I needed that job, because my Daniel was studying among those university books that I could never touch. One day, when he was in his senior year, Daniel came home with a girl, tall, blonde, with that natural elegance that only comes from being born into money. Megan Vance, from a well-to-do family in Greenwich, Connecticut, was studying psychology at Columbia. She was wearing a wool coat that cost more than my salary for 3 months. "Mom, this is Megan, my girlfriend," Daniel announced with a smile I hadn't seen since he was a child. Megan extended a hand as soft as silk, smiled at me with those perfect teeth that only private orthodontics can provide, and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes. Daniel has told me so much about you." But her eyes scanned me from head to toe, assessing my floral housecoat, my worn-out slippers, the second-hand sofa I had bought on Craigslist. In those few seconds, I saw her catalog my entire life as insufficient. From that day on, Daniel's visits became less frequent. First, he came once a week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. He always had excuses: studying, exams, plans with Megan and her friends. "Mom, I'm not a kid anymore. I have to live my own life." When he graduated, I took on extra work to pay for his graduation suit. A charcoal gray suit from Nordstrom that cost $500. Daniel tried it on in front of my bedroom mirror and looked handsome, successful, different. Megan clapped. "Now you really look like an executive," she said, and then turned to me. "Mrs. Hayes, you must be so proud. Daniel can finally start his real life, as if the previous 22 years had been a rehearsal, a time out before the main event, as if I had only been the prelude to his true existence." 3 months after graduation, Daniel found a job at a global consulting firm. His first salary was more than I had earned in a year. He came home with a bottle of champagne, the first time alcohol had ever been in my apartment, and said, "Mom, I can finally pay you back for everything you've done for me." I waited. I waited for months for that repayment to arrive in some form. Not necessarily money, although the mortgage was still there, gnawing at my nights like a persistent rat. I was waiting for time, for calls, for him to ask how I was, for him to invite me to dinner at one of those restaurants he now frequented with Megan. Instead, the calls became shorter and more spaced out. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" Good, me too." Megan sends her love. "I have to go. We're heading into a meeting." When I turned 60, Daniel and Megan were already living together in a rented apartment in the West Village that cost more than my entire monthly income. My birthday fell on a Friday. I waited all morning, all afternoon. At 9 at night, I called. "Mom, happy birthday. I completely forgot. We've been busy all day with Megan's move. She's bringing her things from her parents' house. How about we celebrate next weekend?" Next weekend stretched into the following one, and that one into the next. We finally celebrated my birthday 6 weeks later at a bar near my apartment, for an hour and a half squeezed between other commitments they had. Megan spent the whole time looking at her phone and sighing. A year later, they got married. The wedding was at a vineyard on Long Island with 200 guests. I arrived by subway and bus, wearing the only elegant dress I owned, a navy blue one I'd bought on sale 5 years earlier, and a gift that had cost me 2 months of savings, a porcelain dinner set that Megan had put on her wedding registry at Bloomingdale's. During the ceremony, I sat in the third row. The first was for Megan's parents, investment bankers with a house in Greenwich and a condo in Palm Beach. The second was for her siblings and cousins. I, the groom's mother, was placed between distant aunts and co-workers who barely knew my son. At the reception, Megan introduced me to her friends as Eleanor, Daniel's mother. "She's just adorable." Adorable. The way one talks about a beloved pet that doesn't really belong in your social category. During the dancing, I watched Daniel twirl Megan on the dance floor to a romantic song in English. They looked like they were out of a magazine. Young, beautiful, successful. I stayed at my table, clutching my faux leather purse, watching my son dance into his new life without a single glance toward the woman who had paid for every step of his journey to that moment. That night, on the bus back home, as New York City streamed past the dark window, I understood that I had raised a stranger. That all that unconditional love, all those sacrifices, that whole life dedicated to making him a better man, had built someone who now saw me as a closed chapter of his personal history. But I didn't yet know the worst was still to come, that this stranger, who had been my little boy, would have a child of his own, and that this grandson would become the cruelest weapon they would use against me. Noah was born on a rainy Tuesday in November. Daniel called me from the hospital with a voice I hadn't heard since his childhood. broken with emotion. "Mom, it's a boy. He's perfect. He has your eyes." For the first time in years, I felt needed again, that my place in this family had meaning once more. For the first few months, Megan allowed me to come over and watch the baby 2 afternoons a week. I would arrive at their West Village apartment laden with homemade baby food I had prepared with the meticulousness of a chef, clothes I had hand-knitted on my old singer, and that silent desperation of a grandmother who knows she can only love by permission. Noah knew me. When he cried, I would hold him, and he would calm down instantly. His tiny hands would grip my finger as if it were his anchor in the world. I sang him the same lullabies I had sung to Daniel, those little tunes my mother had taught me, carried in my genes for generations. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Megan would watch me from the sofa with that tight smile she had perfected, the same one she used when she pretended to like my cooking or tolerated my advice about the baby. "Eleanor, don't sing him those old-fashioned songs. That stuff about the mockingbird is so dated." I play classical music for him to stimulate his neural development. But when Megan went to take a shower or run out for diapers, I would keep singing softly as he fell asleep against my chest. Secrets between a grandmother and her grandson that felt like sweet rebellion. When Noah turned 2 and started talking, his first words after Dada and Mama were Nana. Not Grandma, but Nana, as had come naturally to him. Daniel laughed. Megan frowned. Noah say Grandma Eleanor. Aunt Nana sounds so common, but the boy kept calling me Nana. And every time his raspy little voice said it, it filled my chest with a warmth I hadn't felt for months. That's when the restrictions disguised as pedagogical concern began. "Eleanor, we've been reading about the importance of not confusing the child with too many authority figures. Psychologists recommend that, until age 5, they maintain very stable routines." Megan would drop these sentences as casually as someone reading the weather forecast, while I held Noah and felt my stomach clench. "But I'm not an authority figure," I'd reply. "I'm just his grandmother. I just want to watch him grow." Of course. But you have to understand that Daniel and I need to set clear boundaries. The child can't think he can do things with you that he can't do with us." "What things?" "Sing him lullabies? Give him homemade cookies? Read him stories with different voices for each character? Let him fall asleep in my arms watching cartoons?" The visits were reduced to once a week, then every 2 weeks, always supervised and with strict schedules. "From 5 to 7, Eleanor, because after that is dinner time and we don't want to disrupt his routines. 2 hours. 120 minutes every 2 weeks to love the only grandchild I would ever have. To watch his legs grow longer and see the dimples form when he smiled. To hear his little discoveries about the world." One day, when Noah was 3, I arrived with a wooden puzzle I had bought with my savings. It was hand-painted with farm animals. His eyes lit up when he saw it. "Nana, look, a cow." Megan walked over, took the box, and examined it as if it were a bomb. "Eleanor, these wooden toys can have splinters. And the paint. Is it certified non-toxic? You have to be so careful with what you give children these days." She took the puzzle to the kitchen. Noah looked at me with the confusion children have when the adult world makes no sense. "Where's my cow, Nana?" "Mommy will give it to you later," I lied, knowing that puzzle would end up in the trash before I left the apartment. But the last straw came on his 4th birthday. I had spent weeks preparing a chocolate cake, his favorite, with little sugar figurines I had learned to make by watching YouTube tutorials. I got up at 6 in the morning to make it perfect, decorated with 4 colorful candles and his name written in frosting. I arrived at the party with my plastic container, amidst the elegant gift bags from the other guests, parents from Noah's private preschool, with their presents wrapped in expensive paper and silk ribbons. Megan opened the door, already dressed for the occasion in a dress that cost more than my monthly income. "Eleanor, so glad you could make it." Her smile was faker than a $3 bill. "Oh, you brought a cake? How sweet. But look, we already ordered one from that trendy bakery downtown, the one that's all the rage. We can save yours for another day." My cake, those hours of work, that dream of seeing Noah's face light up, was relegated to the refrigerator like an inconvenient object. During the party, I sat in a corner watching Noah play with children who talked about their ski trips to Aspen and their horseback riding lessons. Every time he came near me, Megan would magically appear. "Nico, sweetie, come say hi to Alejandro's parents. They have a very special gift for you." And my grandson would obediently walk away, toward wherever his mother directed him. At the end of the afternoon, after all the guests had left, I helped clean up. Noah came over to me with tired eyes. "Nana, will you sing me the Mockingbird song?" Megan appeared instantly. "Noah, what have we told you about those songs? Besides, Nana has to go now. You have school tomorrow." "But I want her to stay for dinner," the boy protested with the fierce determination of a 4-year-old. "Children who throw tantrums don't get dessert," Megan replied in a sweet but firm voice. Noah looked at me, then at his mother, and he understood. At 4 years old, he understood that loving me came at a price he couldn't afford to pay. From that day on, the visits became colder. Noah would still run to me when I arrived, but now there was something different in his hugs, a caution that shouldn't exist in a child his age. He had learned that showing affection for Nana had consequences. The final blow came when he turned 5. This time, I wasn't even invited to the party. I found out from the photos Daniel posted on Instagram. Noah blowing out the candles on a professional-grade cake, surrounded by stylish children and smiling parents. In none of the 20 photos was there a single trace that this child had a grandmother. I called Daniel that night, when I figured Noah would be asleep. "Son, I saw the pictures. I didn't realize it was Noah's birthday." "Oh, Mom, we forgot to tell you. It's all been such a rush, between work and organizing the party. Daniel, he's your son. He's my grandson. I can't be finding out about his birthday on Instagram." There was a pause. Then his voice sounded different, harder. "Mom, Megan and I have been talking. We think Noah is at a very important stage in his social development. He needs to interact with kids his own age, do stimulating activities. He can't be so dependent on old-fashioned ways." Old-fashioned ways. My love had become an obsolete custom. "What do you mean?" "That maybe it's better if the visits are less frequent. Once a month, on special occasions. That way Noah doesn't build up too many expectations and can focus on his development." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat on my second-hand sofa, in my Queens apartment that suddenly felt smaller than ever, understanding that I had just lost the last piece of family I had left. But what Daniel and Megan didn't know was that there was something they hadn't factored into their perfect calculations. Something that was about to change all the rules of the game they had designed to keep me away from my grandson. My brother Stephen had just died, and his will was about to prove that true love, in the end, always finds a way to deliver justice. Stephen died on a Tuesday in February, while I was recovering from a bout of pneumonia that had kept me housebound for 3 weeks. I didn't find out until Friday, when his neighbor from Hudson, New York, a Mrs. Gable, got my number through the local church and called me with that broken voice reserved for life-altering news. "Eleanor, honey, your brother passed on Tuesday night, in his bed, peaceful, without bothering a soul. Just like him, Stephen." My younger brother, the one with hands eternally stained with varnish and sawdust, the one who chose to stay in our small town while I moved to New York City to find a better future for Daniel. We hadn't spoken in 2 years over something stupid, a political argument at Christmas that had lodged itself between us like a splinter, and now we could never fix those words spoken in anger. The funeral was small, at St. James Church in Hudson, smelling of incense and old wood. I sat in the front row, wearing the only black coat I owned, watching his casket be lowered as the priest spoke of resurrection and eternal life. Beside me, Mrs. Gable squeezed my hand with her papery fingers. "He was a good man, Eleanor. Never married, but he took care of half the town. There wasn't a sticky door or a leaky faucet that Stephen wouldn't fix for free." Daniel didn't come. "Mom, I barely knew him, and I have a really important presentation at work. My thoughts are with you, really. Not even a bouquet of flowers. Not even the courtesy of pretending to care about his mother's brother." After the funeral, the estate lawyer in Hudson, a Mr. Arthur Vance, an older man with thick glasses and a formal demeanor, asked me to stop by his office regarding a matter related to your brother Stephen. His office smelled of old paper and stale coffee. The walls were lined with shelves full of files with worn spines, silent testaments to the lives that had passed through to arrange their final wishes. Mr. Vance motioned me to a cracked leather chair in front of his oak desk. "Mrs. Hayes, your brother Stephen left a will, a very clear, very detailed document." He opened a manila folder and pulled out several typewritten pages. "You are his sole heir." I stared at him, uncomprehending. Stephen lived in a humble house, worked with his hands, and had never shown any sign of having more than he needed to live a dignified life. "Heir to what, Mr. Vance?" The lawyer smiled with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver a pleasant surprise. "Your brother was more prosperous than he let on, Mrs. Hayes. The house on Main Street where he lived, fully paid off and in perfect condition. A 1-acre plot of land on the outskirts of town, with well water and fruit trees. And the shares in Hudson Valley Woodworks, the carpentry business he founded 15 years ago and which has been quietly growing." He pulled out more papers, bank statements, deeds, documents I didn't even know existed. "The shares in the business are valued at an estimated $200,000. The house is appraised at $150,000. The land, another $50,000. In total, we're talking about approximately $400,000. The world stopped. That figure was more money than I had ever seen in my entire life. It was freedom. It was security. It was the possibility of never again having to depend on anyone to survive. "There's something else," Mr. Vance continued, leafing through the will. "Your brother left a personal letter addressed to you." He handed me an envelope with my name written in Stephen's uneven script, the handwriting of a man who learned to write late in life and never lost that initial awkwardness. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a sheet of notebook paper written in blue ballpoint pen. "Eleanor, my sister. If you're reading this, it means I've finally gone to the place where Mom and Dad are waiting. Don't worry about me. I always knew this day would come. And I'm at peace. I'm leaving you everything I have because you're the only blood family I have left, and because I know you've spent too many years giving without receiving. I saw how you raised your Daniel, how you sacrificed for him, and I also saw how that sacrifice wasn't returned as you deserved. Money doesn't fix a lack of love, Eleanor, but it does give you the dignity to not have to beg for affection. Use this inheritance to live for yourself, not to keep buying a love that should be free. The workshop has good men. Manny and Joe have been with me for 10 years, and they know the trade better than I do. If you want to keep the business going, they'll help you. If not, you can sell it. It's yours. I hope this letter doesn't find you with bitterness, but with the joy of knowing your brother loved you until the end, and that you can finally say no without fear of being left alone. A hug from your brother who never stopped being proud of you, Stephen." I cried in that office like I hadn't cried since my parents died. I cried for Stephen, for the years lost to that absurd argument, for all the time we failed to be there for each other as siblings who loved one another. But I also cried with relief, with a liberation I didn't know I needed until I held it in my hands. Mr. Vance offered me a starched handkerchief and waited patiently for me to compose myself. "There is an important procedural detail, Mrs. Hayes. Your son Daniel has contested the will." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean, contested it?" "He filed a claim alleging that your brother was not of sound mind when he made the will, and that you may have exerted undue influence over an elderly person. The probate court has accepted the petition. Daniel, my son, the same one to whom I had dedicated every minute of my life, every dollar from my miserable wages, every drop of sweat from my humiliating jobs, had decided to snatch away the only inheritance I had ever received in 72 years. When did he file the claim?" Mr. Vance consulted his papers. 3 weeks ago, while you were sick with pneumonia. 3 weeks. Daniel had known about Stephen's death, had found out about the will, had consulted lawyers, had prepared an entire legal strategy, and hadn't said a single word to me. While I was coughing in my bed, alone, believing my son was too busy to call and ask how I was, he was busy plotting to take away the only good thing that had happened to me in years. What are the chances he could win? Frankly, very slim. Your brother made the will before me just 6 months ago. He was perfectly lucid, and there is no evidence of coercion on your part. Furthermore, I have audio recordings of the meetings where he confirmed multiple times that this was his free and irrevocable will. Then why would Daniel... Mr. Vance looked at me with the weary understanding of someone who has seen too many families destroyed by money, because he knows you don't have the resources to defend yourself in a lengthy lawsuit. They're hoping that out of exhaustion or fear of legal costs, you'll voluntarily give up the inheritance. In that moment, I understood something that broke my soul. My own son knew me so well that he had calculated exactly how to destroy me. He knew I had never had money for lawyers, that I was afraid of courts and official papers, that my whole life I had preferred to yield rather than fight. But what Daniel didn't know was that something in me had changed since that call from the ICU. Since that afternoon I found out about my grandson's birthday on Instagram. Something had broken for good, and I had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Vance," I said, drying my last tears, "I want to fight this. I want my brother Stephen to rest in peace, knowing his final wish was honored." The lawyer smiled. "In that case, Mrs. Hayes, allow me to recommend the best litigator in the county. His name is Michael Sullivan. He specializes in estate law, and he has a particular quirk. He despises children who sue their parents." For the first time in months, I smiled too. War had been declared, but this time I wasn't going to fight it alone and unarmed. This time I had something more powerful than money. I had the moral certainty of someone defending not just an inheritance, but the dignity of a lifetime of unrequited sacrifices. Daniel was about to find out that his mother had finally learned to say no, and that some battles, when they are just, can be won even from a hospital bed. Michael Sullivan turned out to be a man in his 50s, bald, with a bit of a belly and hawk's eyes behind rimless glasses. His office in downtown Hudson was filled with law books and photos of victorious cases. On the main wall hung a framed diploma, and just below it, a hand-embroidered phrase that read, "Justice is not negotiable." "Mrs. Hayes," he said, after reviewing all the papers I had brought him, "allow me to be direct. Your son and daughter-in-law are two vultures who have miscalculated their chances. We are going to win this case with our eyes closed." But there was something else in his tone, a personal indignation that went beyond professionalism. "Can I ask you something, Michael?" I called him by his first name, because something about him inspired a trust I hadn't felt toward any man in a long time. "Why do you take cases like mine?" He took off his glasses and cleaned them with more attention than was necessary. "My mother was 83 when she died. She spent her last 5 years in a nursing home that I paid for religiously every month. Do you know how many times my sisters visited her in those 5 years? 4. 4 times in 5 years. But when she died, there they were, asking about the will before the body was even cold." He put his glasses back on and looked me straight in the eye. "Parents who sue their children are one thing. It happens. Children who sue their parents are something else entirely. That's just pure malice." From the hospital, via a video call because I hadn't been discharged yet, I attended the first court hearing of my life. Seeing Daniel sitting at the plaintiff's table, dressed in his best suit with that smug expression I knew so well, gave me a strange feeling, a mix of pain and liberation. Megan was beside him, in a black dress she probably thought made her look mournful and compassionate. She wore her hair in a low bun and had on sunglasses, which she removed dramatically when the judge entered, as if the light hurt her eyes from the grief of losing a political uncle to whom she had never spoken more than 10 words. The lawyer they had hired was a young man, the type who talks a lot and says little, with an expensive suit and even more expensive shoes. His name was Bradford Kane, a hyphenated last name that told you everything you needed to know about him. "Your Honor," he began his argument with the kind of grandiosity they must teach at Ivy League schools, "we are looking at a clear case of manipulation of a vulnerable elderly person by a relative who took advantage of the deceased's loneliness and cognitive decline." Manipulation. Cognitive decline. As if Stephen had been a senile old man whom I had tricked with candy and sweet talk to steal his inheritance. Michael stood up slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't gesture. He wasn't theatrical. He simply spoke. "Your Honor, I have here the audio recordings of the 3 meetings Mr. Stephen Hayes had with the estate lawyer, Mr. Arthur Vance. During the drafting of his will, Mrs. Hayes is not present in any of them. Mr. Hayes went alone, of his own volition, and expressed his motivations with total clarity. He placed the player on the table. My brother's voice filled the room, clear, firm, without the slightest trace of confusion or manipulation. Arthur, I want everything to go to my sister Eleanor. That woman has worked herself to the bone her whole life to raise her son, and now that he's a successful man, they have her pushed aside like an old piece of furniture. She hasn't asked me for anything. She doesn't even know I'm doing this. But I know what's fair. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. From my tablet screen, I saw Daniel sink slightly in his seat. Megan took her sunglasses off and put them back on, as if she didn't know what to do with her hands. But the recording continued. My sister and I had our differences, Arthur. I won't deny it. But when I think about who deserves what I've earned, I don't hesitate for a second. Eleanor spent 20 years sewing until all hours of the night so her son could have nice clothes for school. She got up at 5 in the morning to clean offices and came home to keep working. All for that kid. And now it turns out the kid is ashamed of her. Bradford Kane tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. Stephen's voice continued. I don't want anyone coming around later with stories about me not being in my right mind. I'm 70, Arthur, not 90. I know exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. My sister deserves to live her final years without having to beg for emotional scraps from the person who should be caring for her out of love. Michael stopped the recording. The judge, a middle-aged man who looked like he had seen it all, addressed the camera where I appeared from my hospital bed. Mrs. Hayes, do you confirm that you had no knowledge of your brother's testamentary decision until after his passing? Yes, Your Honor. I knew nothing. Stephen and I hadn't spoken in 2 years over something foolish. And do you affirm that it is your wish to keep the inheritance as your brother arranged it? For the first time in my life, without hesitating, without apologizing, without trying to be accommodating, I said, Yes, Your Honor. My brother knew what he was doing, and I accept his will. The judge ruled on the spot. The challenge to the will is dismissed for absolute lack of merit. The will's full validity is confirmed. Court costs are imposed on the plaintiff. Daniel and Megan had to pay not only their own lawyer, but Michael's fees as well. Poetic justice. When I hung up the video call, I stared at the tablet's black screen for a long time. For the first time in 72 years, I had won a battle. I hadn't given in. I hadn't sought peace at any price. I hadn't sacrificed my well-being to keep others happy. And the world hadn't ended. Grace, my trusted nurse, approached the bed. How are you feeling, Eleanor? Strange, I told her. Like I've discovered muscles I never knew I had. She laughed. Those muscles are called self-esteem. They get stronger with exercise. 2 days later, I was discharged. Michael came to pick me up from the hospital in his car, a 5-year-old Honda Accord that smelled of pine air freshener and cold coffee. During the drive up to Hudson, he explained the next steps. The inheritance is now officially yours, Eleanor. The bank papers, the house deed, the business ownership, it's all being processed. In a month, you'll be the legal owner of everything. Owner. That word sounded strange in my life. I had always been a renter, an employee, a dependent, an accessory, never the owner of anything more valuable than some second-hand furniture. There's something else, Michael continued. The guys at the workshop, Manny and Joe, want to meet you. They're nervous. They don't know if you'll want to keep the business or shut it down. What do you think? I think Stephen was no fool. If those men have been with him for 10 years, they must be good. And I think you need a new project, something to make you feel useful in a different way. We arrived in Hudson as the sun was beginning to set behind the historic buildings. The town had that golden late-afternoon glow that makes even problems seem smaller. Michael walked me to the house on Main Street, a 2-story stone building with blue-painted wooden windows. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, it smelled musty, but not neglected. It smelled of the orderly life of a man who took care of himself, who had his routines and his small pleasures. In the kitchen, on a pine table, still lay the newspaper from the day he died, folded to the crossword puzzle page, with 3 words filled in with pencil. In the living room, a worn leather armchair faced a small television. On the walls were photos of us as children, photos of our parents, even one of me from my wedding day that I didn't remember ever giving him. Michael, I said, do you think my brother knew this would happen? That Daniel would contest the will? Eleanor, Your brother was a very observant man. He probably knew exactly how they would react. That's why he prepared everything so well, with so many recordings and witnesses. That night, for the first time in 40 years, I slept in a bed that was mine, in a house that was mine, in a place where no one could kick me out, criticize me, or make me feel like I was in the way. And for the first time in my adult life, I woke up without the urge to please anyone. Hudson Valley Woodworks was on the outskirts of Hudson, in an industrial building that smelled of varnish, machine oil, and freshly cut wood. Manny and Joe were waiting for me at the door like two nervous kids on the first day of school. Manny was a man of about 45, dark-haired, with hands that looked like they were carved from the same wood he worked with. Joe, younger, with sandy hair and freckles, had the shy smile of someone who has learned to earn a living through honest work. They both wore plaid shirts and sawdust-covered work boots. "Mrs. Hayes," Manny said, taking off a worn cap, "we don't know if you want to keep this going, but we want you to know that Stephen was like a father to us. He taught us the trade, always paid us on time, and treated us like family. If you decide to close," Joe added nervously, "we'll understand. But if you decide to continue, we know this business inside and out. The clients, the suppliers, everything." I followed them inside the workshop. There was machinery whose names I didn't know, stacks of lumber with labels I didn't understand, and everywhere the sweet smell of resin and the metallic clang of tools. In a corner, a small office with a metal desk and walls covered in calendars from hardware companies. "How's business?" I asked, trying to sound like I knew what I was talking about. "Good," Manny replied. "We have orders booked through July. We do custom furniture, restore antiques, and we're just starting a project with eco-friendly prefabricated wooden homes." "Your brother had a great eye for business," Joe added. "He always said you have to adapt to the times or die." We spent the whole morning touring the workshop. Manny explained each process with the patience of a teacher, and Joe showed me finished pieces with the pride of an artist. There was something comforting about the place, a sense of order and purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. "What do you need from me?" I finally asked. "Nothing, Mrs. Hayes," Manny replied. "Just for you to trust us. We'll keep working as always, you collect the profits. And if you have any questions or want to change anything, you just let us know." For the first time in my life, someone was asking me to do nothing more than exist and receive. No sacrifices, no proving I deserved it, no paying emotional tolls. "You have a deal," I said, and their smiles were worth more than all the fake hugs I had received in recent years. That afternoon, as I was organizing Stephen's papers at the kitchen table, the landline rang. A number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mom?" Daniel sounded strange, his voice higher-pitched, like when he was a boy and had broken something important. "What do you want, Daniel?" "Mom, we need to talk. Megan and we've been thinking and, well, we think this whole thing has gotten out of hand." "Oh, really?" "Yeah, Mom. We didn't want to hurt you. We were just worried about you, that someone might take advantage of your good nature." The lie sounded rehearsed, like a poorly learned script. "Daniel, you sued me. You hired a lawyer to take my brother's inheritance from me. That's not worry, that's greed." "Mom, please, you're our family. We love you. We've always loved you." It was a horrible misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding? You were planning it for months. You filed the lawsuit while I was sick with pneumonia." There was a pause. Then Megan's voice in the background. "Tell her about Noah." "Mom," Daniel continued, "Noah misses you so much. He asks about you constantly. Wouldn't you like to see him?" There it was. The last resort. The cruelest weapon of all. Of course I'd like to see my grandson, Daniel. I would have liked to see him these past few months when you've kept me away from him. "We could fix that, Mom. Noah could come visit you whenever you want. But for that to happen, we need to be on good terms." The blackmail was served up plainly. Access to my grandson in exchange for what, exactly? "What do you want, Daniel?" "Well, Mom, now that you have this large inheritance, we were thinking you could help us out a bit. You know the apartment in the West Village is getting small for us. Noah needs his own room, and Megan is thinking about having another child. How much?" "Excuse me? How much money do you want in exchange for letting me see my grandson?" Mom, it's not like that. It's just, well, if you helped us with the down payment on a bigger place, say $100,000, we could start over. Like a real family. $100,000. Nearly a third of my inheritance. In exchange for regaining the right to hug the grandson I had helped raise until they decided to cut me out of his life. And if I don't give you the money, what happens with Noah? Another pause. Megan was whispering something in the background. Mom, don't make us choose. You know things have been tense between us. If we could start fresh, with a nice house, without the financial pressures. Daniel, let me ask you something. How many times did you call me when I was in the hospital? Mom, how many times did you come to see me? We were in Dubai, you know that. I was in the ICU for 3 days. 3 days hooked up to machines thinking I might not make it out. And you two were posting pictures on Instagram of your luxury vacation. That's not fair, Mom. We didn't know it was that serious. You know what's not fair, Daniel. That now that I have some money, I'm suddenly important to you. That my grandson has become your emotional hostage. I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. It was a new vibration, an energy I didn't recognize. It was pure, distilled anger, unmixed with the guilt that had been my companion for decades. 2 days later, Megan showed up at my front door. Alone. She was wearing a discreet black dress and a smile she had practiced in the mirror. Eleanor, can we talk? I let her in, offered her coffee, which she refused, and we sat in Stephen's living room. She looked around the house with those calculating eyes I knew so well, evaluating, appraising, imagining possibilities. This house is lovely, she said. It could use some updating, but it has a lot of potential. Did you come here to talk about interior design, Megan? She became serious, adopting that sensitive, understanding expression she used when she wanted something. Eleanor, I know things between us haven't been easy. I admit that maybe I've been too protective of Noah, but I'm a first-time mom, you know? You get paranoid. Paranoid about what? About things happening to him. About him picking up bad habits. About him getting confused with too many different authority figures. The same old words, wrapped in gift paper. Megan, Noah is my grandson. I'm his grandmother, not some dangerous stranger. I know. That's why I'm here. I want things to change. But I need you to do your part too. What part is that? She leaned forward, adopting that intimate posture for important confidences. Eleanor, Daniel, and I are going through a very difficult time financially. The rent in the West Village is killing us. Noah's expenses are getting higher, and with inflation, we need a boost to get ahead. Daniel already told me that on the phone. Do you know what it's like to live with the constant pressure of not making ends meet? What it's like to have to tell your child he can't do extracurricular activities because there's no money? I almost laughed. She was asking me, a woman who had lived with that pressure for 40 years, if I knew what it was like not to make ends meet. Megan, how much does Daniel earn? Well, he has a good salary, but life in New York is very expensive. How much? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. About $5,000 a month, after taxes. $5,000. More than I had ever earned in my life, and she was asking me for pity. And you? Do you work? I'm looking, but it's very difficult with a young child. Besides, Daniel prefers that I focus on the family, so he earns $5,000 a month. You live in a luxury rental apartment, you go on vacation to Dubai, and you want me to give you $100,000. Eleanor, please don't put it like that. It's just, well, if you helped us, we could give you a special place in our lives. Noah could come here on weekends. You could watch him whenever you wanted. A special place? Like a weekend nanny? No. As his grandmother, of course. But a grandmother who's more present, more included. In exchange for $100,000? In exchange for being a real part of our family. I stood up from the sofa. For a moment, Megan thought I was going to get my checkbook. Megan, I said with a calmness that surprised even me, for years, I've bought your affection with my silence, with my money, with my unconditional availability. I've paid for vacations, gifts, dinners, whims, just so you would tolerate me. Eleanor, that's not... I have accepted your contempt, your schedules, your conditions, your humiliations. just to be able to see my grandson for an hour every 2 weeks. Megan had turned pale. But that's over, I continued. My grandson's love is not for sale, and neither is my dignity. But then, you're not going to help us? No, Megan, I'm not giving you a single dollar. She shot up as if on a spring, her true face finally showing. Then you'll never see Noah again. Don't you even think about coming near him. We'll see about that, I said, opening the front door. After she left, I stood in the doorway, watching her car speed off toward the highway back to New York City. For the first time in my life, I had said no, without apologizing, without justifying myself, without begging for forgiveness. And the world kept spinning. The next 2 months were the strangest of my life. For the first time in 72 years, nobody needed me for anything urgent. I didn't have to get up at a specific time. I didn't have to please anyone. I didn't have to justify my decisions to anyone. Freedom felt as foreign as learning a new language. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I would get up at 7 in the morning out of habit, make coffee for 1 instead of 2, and sit in Stephen's kitchen looking out the window at the garden that was now mine. The apple trees were laden with fruit that no one had picked. The tomato plants had grown wild among the weeds. Eleanor, I told myself one morning as I surveyed the green chaos, you have 2 choices. You can sit here feeling sorry for yourself, or you can start living your own life. I went out to the garden with a pair of pruning shears I found in Stephen's tool shed. I didn't really know what I was doing, but there was something therapeutic about cutting away the dead branches, pulling up the weeds that choked the good plants, and bringing order to the mess my brother had unintentionally left behind. My hands got covered in dirt and small cuts, but for the first time in years, it wasn't the pain of cleaning other people's houses or sewing late into the night. It was productive pain that built something instead of just enduring. Manny showed up one afternoon while I was trying to stake some tomato plants that had collapsed under their own weight. Mrs. Hayes, what are you doing out here alone in this heat? Learning, I said, wiping the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand. Your brother used to hire Pete, from town, to come once a week to maintain this. Do you want me to tell him to come back? I thought about it for a moment. I could afford it. For the first time in my life, I could afford to hire someone to do the work for me. But there was something about sinking my hands into the earth, about watching things grow that I had cared for myself, that filled me with a satisfaction I had forgotten existed. No, I said, I want to do it myself, but maybe Pete can teach me what I don't know. Manny smiled. I'll tell him to come by one day to show you the tricks. Stephen used to say that plants are like people. If you treat them with respect, they give you back more than you give them. That afternoon, I called a local garden supply company and ordered topsoil, seasonal seeds, and proper garden tools. When the truck arrived, I felt like a child in a toy store. Rakes, hose, watering cans, gloves that actually fit. For the first time in decades, I was buying something just for me, for the pure pleasure of having it. Pete turned out to be a man in his 60s, tanned like a raisin, who spoke to the plants as if they were people. He taught me to distinguish between weeds and good sprouts, explained when to water and when to let the rain do its job, and told me secrets of the earth that can only be learned with years of experience. Mrs. Hayes has a green thumb, he told Manny one afternoon after watching me work. The plants listened to her. At night, tired in a new way, I would shower and sit in Stephen's leather armchair to read the books on his shelf. Novels I'd never had time to read, biographies of people who had started from scratch at 70, books on carpentry that helped me understand the business I now ran without knowing how. One day, while leafing through one of the carpentry's account books, I came across a letter addressed to me, left as a bookmark between the March invoices. Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means you've finally decided to snoop into my affairs, it began, in that uneven handwriting I now recognized. I have another confession to make. During all those years we were angry with each other, Manny kept me updated on how you were doing. He told me when Daniel wouldn't call for months, when you worked while sick because you couldn't afford to miss a day, when he saw you shopping at the discount grocery store with coupons to make ends meet. My stomach clenched. Manny had been watching over me for all these years on Stephen's orders. Don't hold it against Manny, I asked him to do it because I needed to know you were okay, even though my pride wouldn't let me call you to ask directly. And what I saw broke my heart. My sister, who had sacrificed her whole life for that kid, living like a poor pensioner while he went on vacation to exotic places. Tears began to fall on the paper, smudging the blue ink. That's why I made this will, Eleanor. Not just to give you money, but to give you the chance to say no for the first time in your life, so you could choose who you want at your table without having to invite those who look down on you for fear of being alone. The letter ended with a postscript that made me laugh and cry at the same time. P.S. In the closet in my bedroom, behind the shirts, there's a shoebox. Open it when you feel ready for one more surprise. I went up the stairs almost at a run. In Stephen's bedroom, which I had avoided touching out of respect, I found the closet full of clothes that smelled of lavender and the cheap cologne he'd worn since he was young. Behind the hanging shirts, sure enough, was a shoebox tied with a red ribbon. Inside were photos. Photos of me I didn't remember posing for, taken from a distance over all those years. Me, coming out of the subway on my way to work. Me, shopping at the local market in Queens. Me, sitting on a park bench reading a book on a Sunday afternoon. And next to each photo, a date and a note in Stephen's handwriting. March 15th, 2019, Eleanor coming home from work. Looks tired but not defeated. December 23rd, 2020, Eleanor at the Christmas market, buying gifts that probably won't be appreciated. June 8th, 2021, Eleanor reading in the park. Maybe we should make up before it's too late. At the bottom of the box was an envelope with my name on it. Inside, another message. Eleanor, forgive me for watching you without your permission, but I needed to know that my sister was still the strong woman I've admired my whole life. In these photos, I see someone who never gave up, who kept going even when she was alone, who maintained her dignity even when no one recognized it. I'm proud of you. I always was. I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for the lost years, for the conversations we never had, for the brother who had cared for me from afar without my ever knowing. But I also cried with gratitude, because Stephen had given me back something I thought was lost forever. The certainty that someone had truly seen me, valued me, and believed I was worthy. That night, I had dinner in the garden, under the stars, with a bottle of red wine from a local winery that I found in Stephen's pantry. I made a silent toast to my brother, to the tomatoes that were beginning to ripen, to the apple trees that had yielded the most abundant harvest in years. And for the first time in my memory, I toasted to myself, to Eleanor Hayes, 72 years old, proprietor of a prosperous carpentry business, owner of a house with a garden, a woman free to decide who she wanted in her life and who she did not. 3 days later, as I was pruning the wild rose bushes by the back door, a small figure came running up the path leading to the garden. Nana! Noah, my grandson, just turned 6, running toward me as if the last few months of forced distance had never happened. Behind him, at a distance, was a woman I didn't know. Noah. I hugged him so tightly I thought I might break him. He smelled of children's shampoo and that mix of sweat and adventure kids have when they've been running around. Nana, I missed you so much. Mom told me you were sick and that's why I couldn't see you. The woman approached. She was blonde, in her 30s, with a kind face and practical clothes. You must be Eleanor. I'm Ellen, Noah's new tutor. Daniel and Megan asked me to bring him to see Hudson for a school project on historic towns. I stared at her, not understanding. Do Daniel and Megan know he's here? Ellen gave me a look that said it all. Mrs. Hayes, sometimes adults make mistakes. And sometimes, other adults have to help correct them. Noah tugged on my hand. Nana, can you show me your new house? Ellen told me you have a garden and you grow tomatoes. We spent the whole afternoon together. I taught him how to tell the ripe tomatoes from the green ones. I explained why bees are important for the plants, and I let him help me water with a small watering can I had bought with him in mind, never knowing if we'd ever use it together. When it was time to leave, Ellen gave me a card with her phone number. I usually take Noah out for educational activities on Saturday afternoons. Hudson has a lot of history to teach. That night, lying in the bed that was beginning to feel like my own, I understood that life was giving me back what I had lost, but in a different way. I didn't depend on Daniel and Megan's whims to see my grandson. I had found an ally, someone who understood that the love between grandparents and grandchildren is a right, not a privilege to be bought or sold. For the first time in months, I fell asleep smiling. 6 months after moving to Hudson, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Daniel, but his voice sounded different. It didn't have that usual calculated arrogance, but something I took a moment to recognize. Genuine humility. "Mom, can we talk?" "Go ahead," I said, committing to nothing more. Megan and I have been thinking about everything that happened, and I think we were very wrong about you." I waited. I had learned that silence sometimes says more than words. "Noah has told us about your house, the garden. He says you taught him how to plant tomatoes, and that you know when it's going to rain just by looking at the clouds." A small smile escaped me. Pete had indeed taught me how to read the sky like a newspaper. "Mom, he talks about you every day. He says he wants to live with you in Hudson, that he wants to learn how to make furniture like Grandpa Stephen. And what do you tell him? That his Nana is a very wise woman, and he's lucky to have you." It was the first time in years Daniel had acknowledged any value in me without my having to prove it by paying for something. "Daniel, what exactly do you want?" We want to apologize. For real. No ulterior motives. Not asking for anything in return. Just to say we're sorry." "And Megan? Megan is right here with me. Do you want her to tell you?" "I don't need Megan to tell me, Daniel. I need you both to show me." "How?" "By giving me the only thing I want. Time with my grandson. With no conditions, no blackmail, no charging me an emotional toll for every hug. That's a given, Mom." But I was no longer the old Eleanor, the one who settled for pretty promises. "Daniel, I'm going to be very clear. Noah can come here whenever he wants and whenever I can have him. Not when it's convenient for you to use him as a bargaining chip. If he needs something, you call me. If he wants to spend a weekend here, you tell me. If he wants me to come to the city for a school play, you let me know." "Yes, Mom. Of course. And one more thing. I am not financing your new apartment or your vacations or your whims. My money is for my security and for Noah's future if he ever truly needs it." There was a long pause. "We understand, Mom. We don't want your money. We just want to get our family back." I hung up the phone with a strange feeling. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't satisfied revenge. It was something closer to peace, like when you finish cleaning a room that's been messy for months. The first weekend, Noah officially came to stay with me. He arrived with a backpack full of clothes and a mysterious cardboard box. "What have you got there, champ?" "It's a surprise for you, Nana. I did it all by myself." Inside the box was a clay pot painted with bright colors, and planted in fresh soil was a tiny rose bush with just 3 leaves. Dad helped me buy it at the nursery, but I planted it. Ellen told me that flowers are like people. They need strong roots to grow beautifully. Ellen, that woman, had turned out to be more than just a tutor. She had become a sort of ambassador of sanity in a situation that had been sick for far too long. "It's the most beautiful rose bush I've ever seen," I told him, and it was the truth. That night, while Noah slept in the room I had fixed up for him, with a twin bed, a desk for homework, and shelves full of books I had been buying in anticipation of this moment, I went out to the garden with a cup of chamomile tea. The stars shone with an intensity you only see far from the city lights. Crickets chirped from some hidden corner among the plants. The air smelled of damp earth and the last roses of the year. I sat on the wooden bench that Manny and Joe had built for me as a birthday present. Yes, they had remembered my birthday when my own family had forgotten it for years, and thought about the path that had brought me here. A year ago, I was a woman living in a small apartment in Queens, working for others, emotionally dependent on people who saw me as a necessary burden. A woman who bought love with silence, who apologized for existing, who accepted crumbs of affection as if they were feasts. Now, I was the owner of a house, a business, a piece of land that was flourishing under my hands. I had employees who respected me, friends who valued me, a grandson who ran towards me shouting, "Nana," without looking back to see if his parents gave him permission. Daniel and Megan had started visiting once a month. The first few times, they were tense, like actors playing a role they hadn't quite mastered. But slowly, something had started to shift. Maybe it was seeing Noah so happy running among the apple trees. Maybe it was realizing that I no longer needed their approval to be happy. Maybe they had simply understood that a mother who doesn't beg is more interesting than one who grovels. Megan had started asking me about the garden, about the recipes I made with the vegetables I grew. Daniel asked me for advice about Noah, admitting he didn't know how to handle tantrums or help him with his math. They hadn't changed completely. They were still the selfish, calculating people they had always been. But now they treated me with a kind of cautious respect, like someone handling a valuable object they could no longer afford to break. The workshop was thriving. Manny had proposed expanding the business into building eco-friendly homes, and I had given the green light after carefully studying the numbers. For the first time in my life, I was the one making decisions that affected other people's futures. "Mrs. Hayes," Joe had told me last week, "you have a real knack for this. Your brother would be proud." And I knew it was true. I felt Stephen in the right decisions, in the moments of clarity, in this new ability I had developed to distinguish between what was good for me and what only seemed good. On Sunday morning, Noah and I went to the cemetery together to bring flowers to Stephen's grave. It was a ritual we had developed unspokenly. Every time he visited, we would spend a little time with the grandfather he never knew, but from whom he had inherited his skilled hands and easy laugh. "Nana," he said as we placed yellow chrysanthemums in the granite vase, "do you think Grandpa Stephen knew I was going to exist?" "Why do you ask, sweetie?" "Because Ellen says that people who love us sometimes know things about the future, like how you know it's going to rain before the clouds show up." I thought about his question, so profound for a 6-year-old. I think Grandpa Stephen knew that if anything happened to him, he had to take care of the people he loved. And that included you and me, even though we hadn't properly met yet. Noah nodded with the seriousness children have when they're processing big ideas. So he was like a superhero, like Batman, but with tools instead of a cape. I laughed until my sides hurt. Yes, champ. Grandpa Stephen was like Batman, but with tools. When we got back to the house, Daniel and Megan were waiting in the car, parked by the garden gate. It was time for Noah to go back to the city, to school, to his normal life. The boy hugged me with the intensity kids reserve for important moments. "Nana, next time I come, I want you to teach me how to use the saw like Manny." "Next time," I promised. As I watched the car drive away down the road back to the city, I thought about how strange time is, how sometimes a whole life can change direction in just a few months, how people you thought were lost forever can come back in ways you never imagined. That night, I made a special dinner just for myself. A salad with tomatoes from my garden, a grilled steak, a glass of red wine from the local winery I had discovered. I lit candles, not because it was a special occasion, but because I felt like having dinner with candles. Then I sat in Stephen's leather armchair with a book on organic gardening I had ordered online, and I realized something that filled me with a quiet joy. I was completely alone, and completely happy. For decades, loneliness had been my greatest fear. The fear of being alone had guided every major decision in my life, had made me accept humiliation, pay impossible emotional prices, and give up my dignity time and time again. But now, sitting in my house, surrounded by the comfortable silence of someone who is finally in the right place, I understood that there's a huge difference between being alone and being empty. I wasn't empty anymore. I was full of myself, of my projects, of my plants, of Noah's calls asking if it had rained in Hudson, of Manny and Joe's visits to consult me on workshop decisions, of afternoons with Pete learning secrets of the garden that are only passed from person to person. I was full of a life that was finally my own. And that night, before I went to sleep, I did something I had never done in 72 years. I thanked myself for holding on, for learning, for finding the strength to say no when I had to, and yes when it was right, for surviving long enough to reach the moment when my real story could begin. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Do you know someone who has had to choose between their dignity and the fear of being alone? Tell me in the comments. And if this story has touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. because sometimes sharing these stories is how they reach someone who needs to know that it's never too late to start living the life you truly deserve.